Hey everybody, welcome back to another video from Mixing with Ableton. In our previous episodes, we have seen how to prep a mix, arrange our tracks, and how to approach a rough mix to familiarize ourselves with the song at hand. Then we moved on to working on the foundation of our track, the low end, and finally mixed our drums. Today we are going to talk about synth, keys, and leads. Then we can evaluate our mix and finally get to the vocals. So, without further ado, let's check it out. Remember, this is where we stopped the last time, so you can clearly hear we have a fat, punchy drum track. However, let's keep an open mind as we might adjust this later on. Next up, we have our main synth. For this track, I'm using the EQ before the compressor to shape what the compressor reacts to. I have added some mids and a bit of extreme highs as well. Here is before. After. Notice that I'm using a shelving EQ at 200 Hz to clear up the muds in the extreme low mids. I'm using the compressor to maintain the dynamics and the consistency. Here is before. After. I'm using a relatively high rate of 5:1. I'm using also a 6 millisecond attack for the compressor to kick in fast enough, and my release is at 50 milliseconds so we can hear the next hit. Next we have this synth here. Here is what we were presented with. I'm rolling off everything at 120 Hz. I'm also pushing it a little bit in the highs at 3K. Here is before. After. I'm also adding Ableton's Overdrive plugin to make it pokey and fat in the mix. Here is before. After. Very simple settings. My drive is at 50% at 1.25K, and I'm just sending a portion of it, so it's just 20%. You can hear it's much better with the overdrive on. Again, here's before. After. Can hear it brought it forward in the mix. Next, I have the compressor, which shapes its tone and maintained its consistency. I'm using my 5:1 rate at 9 milliseconds. Here is before compression. After. You can hear that compression maintained its consistency as it was kind of all over the place with the overdrive on with no compression. Next up is my saw synth, which I wanted to add some excitement to and make it less standard. Rolling off everything beyond 90 Hz, and I am cleaning up the mud at 730 Hz, taking off my 3 dB. Here is what we were presented with. After the EQ. Ableton's Auto Pan is here to give it a pulsing effect. Here is before. After. Now that we have done that, we can push it higher a little bit in the mix if we want. Let's put it at -18. Next, I'm using a compressor to maintain its consistency. I'm using a 5:1 rate at relatively fast-ish attack, 9 milliseconds. So here is before compression. After. I also wanted to enhance that pulse effect that I achieved with Ableton's Auto Pan, so I've added another compressor which is sidechained by our kick. Here's before our sidechain. After. Notice that I'm using the shortest attack possible for this. I also wanted to smoothen it out a little bit, so I have added a bit of room reverb that we have talked about previously. I'm just adding a portion of it. You can use any reverb you want for this. Next up, I have this ARP Synth. Here's what we were presented with. Sounded good, but definitely could use a lot of improvement. I'm cutting everything beyond 60 Hertz and I'm using a low shelf at 200 Hertz, removing roughly 1.8 dB, and I'm adding 1 dB at 1.4K. So here's before the EQ again. After. I also wanted it to cut through a little bit more in the mix, so I'm adding Ableton's stock overdrive. Here is before. After. You can hear that is totally different. So what I wanted to do next is bring it forward a little bit in the mix and push the sustain a little bit more. So I'm using this compressor at 5:1K with a relatively shortish attack. So here is before. After. You can hear that the compressor along with the EQ brings in the transients here, so it sounds much better and fuller as well. And again, to smoothen it lightly, I'm using the room reverb, very similar to the previous track. So here is before our processing. You can hear it's there, but not quite there. After. So next up is our main lead. So let's hear what we were presented with. Okay, it sounds really good and sounds very original. So I wanted those leads to sit better in the mix. So in this EQ, I'm rolling off everything beyond 300 Hertz, pushing the extreme highs at roughly 7K, just 2 dB, not so much. I'm also cleaning up some muddiness around 800 Hertz. So here is before the EQ. After. And a bit of compression to maintain its consistency. much better, makes it sit better in the mix as well. I think I will also add some width for this, not too much, just an additional 10%. And to smoothen it slightly, I am just adding a bit of room reverb for this. So here's before our processing. After. So that's it for this video. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the vocals and how to approach automation and evaluate our mix. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please, as ever, subscribe and hit the notification button. Have fun mixing, and I will see you soon.